Deuce, motherfuckers. See, I'm living in the sick society that preaches moronic logic. Think you control my destiny? You motherfuckers get off it. Much more than a prophet, much more than a poet. Why? Because all existence as I know it cannot be put into words, nor phrases, nor verbs. It's the vibes of my collective sense, makes up my residence. My circle of power is my circle of friends. My circle of power is where my energy begins. We all strive toward enlightenment, the means to see. Focus is reality, and it seems to be humbly and peacefully a reflection of love. From below, from above, and everywhere in between. I've lived 10,000 lives through my 10,000 dreams. I picked the fruits of wisdom from my family tree. I'm saying I picked the fruits of wisdom from my family tree. Now that's you being me and me being me. What up, Soul Brother number one? So we're here. I'm here to tell you guys a little story about the way I came up and whatnot. To start off, I was a young man. Well, before I was a young man, I was born to a black man and a beautiful English Canadian woman. I was born in Canada. And I'm going to start it off here. When they had brought me back across the border, my parents were old hippies and whatnot, so the whole racial thing just really never had any bearing on their lives and what they did. It was all, you know, free love and energy and whatnot. And remember hearing a story from my mother telling me about bringing me back over the border. They were hitchhiking with me, her and my dad, when I was just a pup, and they had stopped somewhere. I want to say somewhere in the somewhere in the South, and a truck driver had picked them up and was like, "You guys need to get in my truck right now." And they're like, "Why do we need to get in the truck right now?" They're like, "Because you being a white woman and you being a black man and you're hitchhiking across the South with a half nigger baby, this shit ain't gonna fly. Get in the truck right now." So, you know, that being said, you know, growing up here in Santa Fe and whatnot was never too difficult for me as far as some of those things went. Being a brother here, there's not too many brothers around here. You know, it's always been you know, it's like bus drivers do. You know, they wave to each other when they see each other passing, you know, driving by and shit. That's kind of how brothers do around here. There's not too many of us. It's like, you see another brother down the street, you're like, "What's up, man?" You know, you got to get the black fist going and whatever the fuck. So I was, my dad was living in Texas, and I used to go down there when I was a shorty and spend summers and holidays and whatnot with him. And you know, living the east side of San Antonio, right in the thick of the hood, and me being mixed, there was a lot of times and situations I'd go down there and, you know, hanging out with the brothers and whatnot, and you find yourself coming from a mixed family like that. There were times being down there where you had to really like beef it up, man. Like you had to be, you know, get on that like niggerish shit, you know what I mean? Get like, you know, you were never dark enough for the brothers, you know, you weren't quite black enough for the brothers, but then you had to tone it down when you were around, you know, your white folks and stuff, because, you know, you had to, you know, kind of fit the mold to whatever situation you'd find yourself in. And I remember playing dominoes at this guy Rodney's house, and that was one of the times I really got to see how it was. First to me playing Bones, you know, hadn't really ever played with these guys before, and truth be told, I ended up playing the rest of this game out with my pants and my underwear around my ankles, because that's the way they kind of initiate you in from being like some, you know, simp kid coming from whatever to being in the hood and seeing how niggas really get down, you know. And didn't really ever have a problem with it, whatever, trying to, you know, fit in or find your place. I was, you know, always taught that being mixed, I had the best of both worlds. So to use to my advantage, you know, any means possible. So I remember leaving that summer, and shortly after that, I had got an invitation to go meet Bill Clinton out at the White House. And you want to talk about a mind fuck, man. You coming from spending all that time in the hood with these cats, and you gotta play that part. And even still, you're not, you know, you're still an outsider, man. You know what I mean? And then to go to a place like DC, you know, get picked up and by the Secret Service, brought over to the Department of Education, and get a speech written for you. You got to go to the White House and give a speech at the White House with the president and senators and everybody like this. And you really got to, you know, I used to have an uncle, his name was Tom. You might know what I'm saying about that. So you really have to, you know, you have to change the game up as far as that stuff goes, being around, you know, these uppity white folks and politicians and things of that matter. Never really found it too hard to do. I've always proud of myself and prided myself in the fact that knowing I can go to the ghettos, the ghetto hoods and be okay, and then go to a place like the White House and be just fine. You know, like I said, to go back, you know, growing up here in Santa Fe, being that there wasn't too many brothers around, I kind of had it easy, I guess, to say. I was more than a minority here. There was, I think there was me and one other young brother who probably actually had, Chris, I think was another half-breed like myself. And in that aspect, we were kind of like, you know, the outsider, kind of like superstars, so to speak. You know, I mean, there wasn't much that we couldn't get away with because of, you know, the predominant, I don't want to say Hispanic or Chicano, Latin culture here. Kind of was easy for me to just kind of scoot through. It was only when I would go down and visit with my dad's side of the family that you really see these cultural differences. And if you've never been, don't go, because it's, you know, it's just not a place that you ever want to be.
This is an old tale, actually very old. It's a 50-year-old tale. On my first day of elementary school, I was a Spanish-speaking, monolingual Spanish-speaking student in Boyle Heights, which is just east of the LA River in Los Angeles. This was way back in the 1950s, 1956. While nuclear bombs were being exploded 100 miles away, while televisions were flickering in black and white, I was in a public school that had existed since the early 20s, that all the curriculum, all the books were also from the 30s and the 20s, and actually some of the teachers had been there since the school had opened, and so the population in the neighborhood where I was at was primarily Russian, Jewish, and Japanese, few Latinos in that specific neighborhood of Boyle Heights, but my family was the first to arrive in that particular neighborhood, and I was the only non-English speaking student in that class. And I think it was by design. My teacher, kindergarten teacher, whose name was Miss Flint, thought that I should be given an assignment immediately, one that would involve my hands, three-dimensional construction, and also a bit of performative nature because it was done in front of the class. She pulled up a chair, brought out a very large sheet of a construction paper, helped me to form a cone in which she taped it together, pulled out a paintbrush with tempera paint, so I was getting my first art activity, and she spelled the word Spanish on the cone, sat me on the chair and placed the cone on top of my head, and waved her finger at me and told me that I could get off that chair when I learned to speak English. Of course, I wasn't exactly clear on what was happening. I kind of understood the tone. A cousin who was in the back of the room, who was bilingual, explained to me that the teacher, by and large, was attacking me, declaring a cultural war on me. I think the instructor had very little idea what my background was, the people I came from, and so I accepted the challenge and also declared war. And so for the next 13 years, I worked very hard to make certain that no one would ever do that again to another child, let alone anyone that looked like me, sounded like me, and anyone that looked like her. It actually took a very long time for me to readjust my thinking so that I would no longer be at war. But I'm no longer at war. I'm actually more into sharing the information that I've gathered over a lifetime of observing and being at the subject of various events that have taken place, and having been witness to various events. And I find that in today's world, in Southern California, I've lived most of my life in Los Angeles, that these cycles of hatred and retribution continue. Much of the hatred is inwardly directed, and then reaches a core, and then it bounces back and becomes outwardly directed. One of the things that has been able to short circuit the loop of hatred, maybe because I did go through the 60s, and maybe because I'm a father and a grandfather, and have witnessed a few too many friends die a little too suddenly and a little too young. What I've discovered, of course, is sort of an age-old understanding that what breaks the cycle of hatred is love. And so I may not look like the person that loves everyone, and I may not sound like the person that loves everyone, but I believe that mostly everything I do is directed by love for human beings, and that I really don't want bad things to happen to people. And I try to share my information in a way that will make an impact, and that will transcend the barriers that might be erected every so often through the use of humor, and every so often through the use of overly dramatized, overly exaggerated tales.
I don't ever remember not knowing two things. One, that I was French-Canadian, and the other, that I was Indian. Everybody in my family knew it, and it was no big deal. We all looked pretty much the same, with long black hair if we were girls, and dark eyes. And you know, we were raised by my grandmother in a large extent. She had 18 grandchildren, and she would tell us stories. She had hair, long black hair down to her knees, past her knees, and she'd comb her hair, and she'd tell us stories about growing up on the farm, working in the mill, in the textile mills when she was a little girl, and about her full-blood Indian grandmother, who lived to be 104 years old. Being Indian was no big deal in our community. In fact, it put us as mixed bloods at a disadvantage in most ways. But when I went out into the world, people would ask me what I was. They couldn't figure out what I was. And I'd say, well, you know, I'm French and I'm Indian. And sometimes they thought I was from, you know, across the seas, an East Indian. But as I went out into the world, I started to see how the values my grandmother had taught me were indigenous values. And the politics that I felt were indigenous politics, and that's what drew me to a lot of activists and other artists that were making art about something more than just to decorate. As a young adult, I connected up with a lot of Native artists and Native rights activists, like Winona LaDuke and George Morrison, who was an Anishinaabe elder who was a mentor to me. And during this time, I was asked many times, you know, please be, you know, come and be in our exhibit, put your art in our exhibit, participate in our community. And I would always explain to people that because my family was Canadian Indian, that we didn't have treaty status, and that I didn't have any papers. All I had was my grandparents' stories about being Native, and I have Native background on all four sides of my, you know, grandparents. And they would say, you know, well, you know, we still want you to be in it. and that went on for years, you know, from the mid-70s until I went to Navajo Nation in 1984, and that continued there with my family, and did art exhibits with people, and brought Native contemporary artists to the people on the reservation. And then I moved to Santa Fe in 1988, and I was blackballed, I was blacklisted. My name was put in the paper, and I was accused of exploiting Indian people. And I was shocked because, you know, all of my work had been volunteer and had been grassroots, community-based. When I look back on it, I realized that was probably the reason why, because I was working with Indigenous lands right activists and with the Treaty Council and people who were against the United States government and the occupation of native lands by the federal government. And so at any rate, I decided, okay, they can't say I'm not a woman, so I worked with Women's Caucus for Art for about 9 years, and I worked on honoring women artists of all colors and all backgrounds, and a lot of the Native artists, including the Pueblo matriarchs. And then I was asked to curate exhibits. I curated IAA Rocks the 60s at the museum here at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and I curated Native Abstraction at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. And then at that time, at each time this happened, letters were sent by people saying that I should not be allowed to do this because I didn't have papers as a federally recognized, in a federally recognized tribe by the U.S. government. So I just kept doing my work and promoting Indian artists, writing books. I did a show at the Santa Fe Art Institute called Indian Art with, I think, 30 Native artists. And then in 2004 at the Smithsonian, the Native American Museum at the Smithsonian blackballed me. Because I had come up with an idea for an exhibit on George Morrison, my mentor, and they decided to steal the idea, do it, and exclude me from it, and the best way to do that would be to blackball me. So they stopped contracts on my work, and they stopped book signings of my book, It Stops With Me. And at that point, and even exhibits that I was scheduled to curate. So after over 30 years working as an expert in contemporary Indian art, I was blackballed totally from my field. And what I decided to do was to just continue with my activism and to share my work on Native communities and my connections with artists and activists in these communities with the public. And that led me to working with Russell Means, the great Lakota leader who we worked together in the Impressionist art movement. And then from that, I've been working with Martin Luther King III on the Realizing the Dream Poverty in America initiative. And in a lot of ways it's come full circle because I was prevented from doing the work that I was trained to do and knew how to do. But it led my path to intensify in the work that I was really supposed to be doing. Values that I was raised with, of my grandmother telling me stories, teaching me to be part of the community, and to express myself in an artistic way, to do handwork, to make art, although at that time I didn't do classic paintings. But she encouraged me to be creative and taught me Native values.
Well, I grew up in the 1950s. I was born in 1951, just in time for many new kinds of things to take place, post-war environment. Television was in every home, but because television was in every home, it was then possible for the new, fast, easy to digest, conceptually and physically popular foods were discovered and promoted. Twinkies, various kinds of fast foods, bologna sandwiches, Kool-Aid, all the things that in the end resulted in mass suicides in the 60s and 70s, or would produce an excuse for a murder at some point. But these are the kinds of things that were promoted for people to eat across the country. Of course, I came from a background where there had been sort of a long tradition of Mexican foods to be eaten. But back in the 1950s, prior to the civil rights movement, one would have to eliminate all traces of relevance to Mexican culture if one wanted to get through the day. So if you were to take any kind of Mexican-related foods to school, you would be punished. And one day, I think it kind of hit me. I must admit, I probably felt some of the existentialist angst from the 1950s. It just happened the other day when I saw this very large person, I guess would be classified as obese, with something that looked something akin to a pillow. And I asked the person what it was, and he says, "Oh, it's a wrap." I said, "Well, what do you mean by a wrap?" He says, "Well, yeah, some other people would call it a burrito." And in this wrap was everything that one could possibly think of putting into it. And he devoured the thing. And I recall that my friends whose parents would make them burritos for lunch would hide them under their jackets and eat them surreptitiously in the closet, go in the bathroom stall so they could eat something like that. My family, my mother in particular, was the youngest of 12 children, and she was raised to do all the cooking and to take care of all the sick and dying people. She was basically a hospice care worker ever since she was a little girl, and my mom has continued to do that her whole life. She's always knows who's about to die, always taking care of people. I tell all my friends, please don't accept any kind of Mexican sweetbread, they call it pan dulce, from my mother, because that's a bad sign. You must reject it. If you eat my mother's sweetbread, we'll be, I'll be very polite at your funeral. It's not like she's poisoning the bread, but she has an opportunity to see your aura on some level. So I've made certain that I always buy my own Twinkies. And I think there was one I bought in the 1950s, and I took a look at it, and it looks as fresh as ever.
I grew up in the pirate religion. In my family, every holiday, my mother and my matans and my grandmother would make the most delicious flaky pies, blueberry pies, pumpkin chiffon pies, apple pies, every kind of pie you could ever imagine. And they would compete, the sisters, or the matans, or aunties, I guess as you would say, would compete for the best pies. So on Thanksgiving night or Christmas night, we'd go to my Matan Kurt's house and tiptoe over into the room where all the pies were displayed, and there'd be about 30 pies. And everybody would have to have a slice of each. When I grew up, I didn't realize that not everybody had 30 pies at when the family gathered together. And my husband was really shocked, when he saw that. But to me, it was a very important part of seeing the way that the women could turn just simple flour and water and some fruit or vegetables, or even the famous Christmas Eve pie with pork, the pork touchière. And these were all part of my culture that made it so that we knew that we were French Canadian and we were mixed blood and we were from a different background than all of the people in America around us. When we watched TV, we knew that the people in our community in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and our families with their French names and their stories of hunting for frogs at dawn, before dawn, and bringing them home and cooking them up in the pan with butter and onions, and taking the bones and pulling the meat off the bones with your teeth. And when I was a little girl, I didn't know that being called frog was a derogatory term until I went out into the rest of the world. But when I was a little girl, it was the most delicious taste I'd ever tasted. And it was so amazing that my relatives, my grandfather, Pappy, and my uncle, Roger, would go out and they could get these frogs and bring them home and we could eat them. Or that they kept rabbits. And before I was born, or when I was too little to know, they kept pigeons too. And they would slaughter the rabbits and my grandmother would skin them and she'd cook them up and she'd make a beautiful stew with the rabbit meat. And all of those things are things that I'd like to pass on to my children, but they don't exist anymore. And so every once in a while, I'll get a rabbit and I'll make a stew for them and try to share with them those memories. But it can never be the same because they can't hear the French language. They can't hear the wonderful blending of French and English words that were resonated in the kitchen at my grandmother's house.
Hilarious, man. It wasn't maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm hanging out with this brother Joel, man, and he's a light-skinned brother from from the South and whatnot. And we got in this whole conversation about foods and whatnot. You know, you know, the whole watermelon, you know, that whole fucking chili eating motherfuckers and collard greens and all that, which, you know, I'm not too big on pig's feet, but I'll fuck some greens up, I'll tell you that. Me and Joel go out the other night, and we're chilling and we get into this whole conversation about this food and stuff, and we're out having drinks and stuff, and of course fried chicken had got brought up, you know, us being brothers and whatnot. And we were talking about how hard it is to find good fried chicken here, man. And he's like, you know where they got some bomb-ass fried chicken? I'm like, where's that, Joel? He's like, we're going over to the Pink Adobe. I'm like, the Pink Adobe? I'm like, you out of your fucking mind? So we walk in there the other night, and we're half in the bag already and shit. We sit down up at this little table, we order a round of scotch and whatnot. And the waitress comes up, cute little chick, and she's like, you know, can I get you guys any menus or anything before the kitchen closes? And I was like, yeah, you know, I heard you guys had some good new dishes. And she took one look at me and Joel, and she was like, you guys want to try our fried chicken? And I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And sure enough, I was like, actually, that's exactly what I came in to do, is try your fried chicken. Yeah, leave it to the couple niggas over here, be the only two patrons in your bar not ordering green chili and margaritas, right? We got some scotch or some Hennessy and fried chicken. And I ate the fried chicken, and it was actually very good. I recommend going and checking it out. But
when I was applying to undergrad, and just undergrad, you have to fill out a form where you say what race you are, and from what I hear, apparently that takes into account how many people get in, and if you get in or not. So then some people like strategize whether they're going to check Hispanic, because they're looking for more Hispanics to fill some quota, or they won't, or I don't know how it really works the percentage wise, but it felt like when it came time for me to choose what box to check, I couldn't fill anyone because I couldn't pick between being Asian or Hispanic at all, and they said like choose one box, and you know, kind of felt like family ties, like who am I closer to, and you know, like choose a parent or something. But I guess so I ended up not checking a box, and then afterwards I was a Latin American Studies minor, so then I hung out with a lot of the Latino kids there and learned that the way people looked at them was just because they checked the box, and there was this whole affirmative action thing going on. It was like, oh, you have to, you know, you're probably at the school just because you're like Hispanic, and they were looking for more Latinos to fill this like number, and it's not like your intelligence that got you here or something, which I always kind of felt good that I never checked the box, because then I didn't want people to see that, to think that I was there because of my race, not because of what I knew. And so it was kind of, you know, I felt like you kind of had to hide your race there. Just because if you were to say you're a minority, then people would look at you like you're not smart enough to be here and you're just here because of the bureaucracy of getting different cultures in this school or something like that. Which I understand is like, there's other arguments about affirmative action being good and getting people. At home, growing up, it always felt like I was always closer to my dad because we grew up speaking the same language, whereas my mom's family, I never really learned how to speak Korean fluently. So it always felt like I could never talk to her in her own native language, and her Spanish has like a small accent, and sometimes she'll say wrong words, and so it always felt like she was this other person just because we couldn't speak the same native language. And same with my grandparents, like they don't speak anything but Korean, so we would have to do a lot of hand signaling. And so when, even though I lived with my grandma for a while, it never really felt like I knew her. And when she died, everybody was really upset in her family, and they just felt like I was so removed from her because not being able to get to know her because we didn't speak the same language.
Being from New Mexico is kind of like a clash for me because I have a mom who's white and she's from Ames, Iowa, and my dad is Hispanic and he's born and raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And being from them, I've always been pretty much a white boy in everybody's eyes, but really I'm half Hispanic and half white. And everybody that I've ever been affiliated with in my life, they always crack jokes and tease me and everything else because being in a Hispanic culture and being from New Mexico and living in New Mexico, you're okay if you're Hispanic. Everyone accepts you, but when you're like me, half Hispanic, half white, and I got the green eyes, everybody always cracks jokes and calls me coyote or a Twinkie because I'm half Hispanic and half white, and green eyes and everything else like that. And I have always found in my life that I have to keep proving myself to be Hispanic from anything from trying to outdrink everybody at a party or pick up more ladies or just all around fighting or brawling or anything like that. I would always have to prove myself when I was younger with my brother and his friends because I'd always have to fight them off of me when they gang up on me. But all in all, that kind of experience made me a tougher person, and in the end I think that I kind of proved myself to be Hispanic.
Back to my school when I was younger. When I was at Pinecrest, everyone had all their families, had really nice jobs. That's how we were able to afford to go there. And everyone kind of assumed that I was there off like some other people's graces, which was funny because that wasn't the case. Because my dad actually made more money than all their parents did, probably combined. Because he was the head LA Times distributor for the Santa Cruz Valley. And at that moment in time, if you all know how this valley grew, it was, it was constantly growing. Like one summer, we didn't have a mall, and then we did have a mall. And same came with my dad's job. So, you know, my dad was like the head guy, and there's like, oh, but he cleans our houses. Like his company cleans our houses, you know. Oh, because I'm Mexican, I guess we got to clean the houses. That was funny because he had that company, but that was just his like side company. Like, oh, this is just for fun. So you put those two companies together. My dad was making, you know, 6 figures a year doing that, more so than other people who were teachers or, you know, working for other people. Like, my dad was the boss. Everyone else was somebody else's boy, and my dad was the man. So that's kind of ironic in that sense, because everyone assumed that, oh yeah, Tony, oh yeah, you know, I got some extra shoes. Do you want them? It's like, no, I got some extra shoes. Do you want them? Kind of thing. You know what I mean? And it was just ironic and funny how that turned out to be. You know, everyone assumed because I was Mexican that, you know, that my dad, you know, was a busser or a cook or something. And, yeah, right. Definitely.
Really interesting experience because it depends on who I go with. If I go with a bunch of non-Asian people, then I will get chopsticks, but if I go with a lot of Asian people, then they will give me a fork. I think that this happens because relative to whatever someone else looks like, then when I'm around a lot of Asians, I'm really not so Asian in comparison, but the other way around, then it's like token Asian person. So it's kind of weird how everybody around you kind of determines how you get served. When I first moved here, I would go to these restaurants, and it was kind of interesting that everybody that worked there spoke Spanish, that made the food. But since I don't really look like I speak Spanish, they would start talking shit about customers, different little things that they would be doing that would bother them, like, oh man, that guy's taking too much sauce, like we're gonna have to refill it. And they would have like these inside jokes about specific customers, and it was really interesting that I could understand them and they still felt comfortable not knowing that I could hear them. And then sometimes, like when they said stuff that they would be annoyed about, like different mannerisms that the people there did, then sometimes I would do them, so then they would talk smack about me too, like double sauce or something. And so yeah, they never found out that I could understand that they were talking about me right to my face.
I have a mom who's white and a dad who's Hispanic, and my dad is the one with the last name that I have, which is Rougemont, so it's kind of funny because I have a Hispanic French last name, or that's what I am. And my mom, she's a white girl, but she definitely has the best New Mexican cooking skills. Everybody in New Mexico pretty much competes with their chili, and everyone cooks chili and has their own chilies with red or green. But my mom, being white, probably is one of the best cooks with New Mexican food, especially green and red chili. All my friends used to always come over and eat her chili, and all my family members always come over to eat it too. And I remember my friend Sage coming over to eat her chili all the time, and he could pretty much eat the hottest chili out of anybody that I know, even all the Hispanic people, and that's why we call him Culo de Fuego. I have a brother who's in prison, and I always talk to him pretty much every Sunday, and he tells me how much he misses my mom's cooking too.
Going to a family function, like I was coming from a white family that like they saw me as white because compared to my cousins, I'm definitely the whitest one of them all. I would go for like that side, the Mexican food, because it was bomb, and I'd fill up on it, and they'd always trick me because I never really grew up eating spicy food. So when I was little, I'd always try like the chili, and so we'd have like all these different selections up, and they'd all be putting like the hottest one and being, ooh, caking it on there, and I'd be like, all right, well, I'm gonna do this. You know, I'm gonna show them that they're not any more Mexican than me. You know, who are they? So I go on there and I pack it on, and next thing you know, I take a bite and it is hot. We're talking like, whoo, like I'm sweating under my eyes. It's not good, and they're laughing, and they're just like, oh, it's like nothing, and so then it's funny to me. So from my dad's side of the family, the perception of me was this white gringo kid that is trying to fit in, but really there's no way he can claim his bean status, you know, a Mexican, you know, hood. So, but it was just a funny joke because my last name's Diaz. So now, and I went to private school when I was younger. So everyone I went to school was white. Like I was the only minority that went to the school, and like we didn't even have one black student in our school. That should tell you. And so every time we'd have like a class function or a party, like everyone would have a sign-up sheet, like who would bring what. And if you were like one of the last people like me to like always like sign up, you get stuck with whatever the teacher assigned you or what was left that none of the other kids picked. So I like 99% of the time when I didn't get up and sign up for something, I always got chips and salsa. And I was just like, wow, like that is. At first I thought it was like a coincidence, but every single year, every single party, I'm getting chips and salsa. And it's like, well, I've thought about it now. I was like, my last name is Diaz, and like everyone assumed that I made the best salsa, which is funny because no, it's not that how it goes. Like my mom could make bomb other things. Like why couldn't I get the pizza? Like the kids' parents that got the pizza, they would order it and they just drop it off. My mom would be like making some fresh salsa, and be like, man, there's some high expectations, because that's how we felt, because we were the only Mexicans in the class. Like, it was funny. So, but that's a story of like, so around them, they thought I was 100% Mexican. Like I was a minority. Like I'm the expert on being Latino, and when I was around a bunch of white kids, and then when I was around my Mexican cousins, I was like on the low of the totem pole. Like you are the least of us all. So. Between those two situations, and especially my mom being from American Indian, like she was always like making like hamburgers and hot dogs. Like she wasn't able to be trusted with all the other stuff that she was making, which was funny because my mom is actually a great cook. So yeah, funny stories like how people assume that is because I'm a Diaz. And
my father wasn't supportive, you know. My father didn't really say much, and he still really doesn't say much in general. And if he does, it's like pretty harsh. I mean, he's a very stern, very intense, quiet Mexican man. And it's strange because, you know, my father, I look like my father looked when he was my age, exactly, almost. And when he was growing up, he used to have this nickname they used to call him Boni, which is short for bonito, which means pretty boy, you know. And he used to wear like really tight pants in the 70s. Like he used to be like really, really, really stylish. And he was really poor, you know, so like to be stylish you had to like work. You had to like be pretty inventive. And but like, you know, people would always, I think, I was told that, you know, when he was younger, people would always call him a queer because he was so pretty and because he took such good care of himself. And I think my father never really dealt with that. And I think actually, I don't know, maybe my dad is queer, you know, underneath it all. But he's never been able to like fully explore that. And, you know, my father had me, my parents had me at a very young age, so like when my father was 26, I was 6, which is my age now. I'm 26 now. And when I was 6, I used to watch my dad's porn. You know, like I would go into his porn collection and like pop in all those porns. In certain ways, like I was getting my sex education from his porns in the same way that he was getting his sex education, because like being 26, like you're still kind of discovering like your sexual situation, you know? So, you know, my father and I, we didn't meet until I had never met him until I was 6. And he was like this myth, and I was like actually kind of scared of him because I'd heard a lot of stories about how violent he was towards people and towards my mother, and how like crazy and mean. Like he was really, really full of like angst towards the world, and he would take it out on other people. And supposedly that angst comes from the fact that his own father died at a very young age. But so, you know, when we first met, when I was 6 and he was 26, we had this relationship that was like immediately, you know, obviously parental, and also like there was like this fear and this attraction, and that fear and that attraction was how we got to know each other initially, and so our relationship became sexual pretty soon thereafter. And you know, my father would you know, I guess you could say that he, you know, he would crawl into my bed like every Sunday, and he would like, and we would have conversations, and you know, he would touch me, and it was the only time where I felt like it was really the only time where I wasn't being yelled at by him. So like I was really thankful for it at the time. And I was also like really turned on because my father was actually like a very good-looking man. Like he used to play soccer, and you know, as a child I would like he was like very he demanded that we, for example, that when he got home from work, he sat down on the couch, and I would go and take his shoes off, and like unlace them, take his socks off, and I would like put his shoes away. Like he had, and throughout his life, he always had someone to do that for him. You know, so like he had servants. He made like his family into servants. And in certain ways, like I feared that, but I admired that, you know? And I guess that's kind of like, I mean, that's a master-slave relationship, obviously. But at the same time, I've chosen not to really read it in that way, I guess. Because I think it's much more complex. I think our relationship is much more complex than that. And but you know, it's interesting that, for example, I'd never formally like told my father that I was gay. And part of the reason why I haven't done that actually is because, I mean, how do you tell the person the man, you know, that you first loved as a man for being a man, that you're gay, you know? Like, I don't think, you know, it's so interesting to think about these things that have remained unsaid.
Usually when I go to jail, it's because I was drinking. So we were hanging out and having a great time, and well, to make a short story long, I ended up in jail, dressed up in my nice club clothes, you know, button-up shirt, you know, nice watch. Of course, when you go to jail, they take off the watch and stuff. And I was just there in like booking, you know, they just kept a bunch of us there, and it just so happened there was a bunch of Mexicans, you know, and they're all like hanging out, so they like do the lights out thing, and I'm laying down in Bernalillo County Detention Center with a bunch of Mexicans, and I'm Mexican myself, you know, I speak Spanish, kind of, you know, I understand it, but Mexican Spanish is a lot different than Northern New Mexican Spanish, you know, having a dialect stuck here in Santa Fe for 400 years, you know, we speak, and then we have Native American words, you know, so like, being from Mexico, or being New Mexican and being Spanish, you know, there's Spanish people in Mexico, and there's like native South American Indians over there. And well, when you're in jail, you know, you're kind of classified by what you're wearing and how you look. And I was wearing nice business, but you know, going out to a club, and I fell asleep, you know, I'm laying there like this. And I hear these Mexicans in there, just all talking in Spanish, and one of them was like, míralo ese gringo, you know, eso gabacho, lo vamos a lograr los zapatos cuando está durmiendo. And I'm like, that fucker wants to take my shoes off when I'm sleeping, because that's, you know, what he's talking about. And I'm turning over, okay, I'm not really sleeping, you know, I'm awake, but he thinks that, of course, I don't understand him because my short hair, you know, light skin, I look a lot different, dressed different, you know, just dressed different. Basically, we're the same people, you know, we're all from here, and, you know, people that live here are from here too, you know, a lot of our white friends become Hispanic by osmosis, just like I became Anglo by osmosis, American by osmosis, to this Mexican guy. And I'm laying down there, and he's like, míralo, chavo, shh. Starts whispering, you know, little lullabies, trying to get me to go to sleep. And finally, I told him in Spanish, pruébame, cabrón, pruébame ahora cuando está abierto, when I'm open, when I'm awake. If you want to steal my shoes, do it when I'm awake. And all his Mexican buddies chimed in, hey, mira, eso pocho, te digo, ya te digo el pocho. And, you know, the guy was kind of embarrassed because he, of course, thought I didn't know what Spanish he was speaking.
I first moved to LA from the East Coast. I was actually really excited to move to LA because, you know, I think of California as like my backyard because I grew up here in San Diego. You know, like I'm the son of an immigrant family, and so I come from generations of like illegal immigrants that have moved to San Diego. And throughout the Southwest, I guess. But I was really excited to come back to California because it was like, you know, as a photographer, to be somewhere familiar, you know, and be able to do, I don't know, maybe to deal with things that, for example, I couldn't deal with in the East Coast, and also like to face particular things about like my identity or like the border in particular and so on. And so when I first came to LA, I had to get a job, and it was like July, midsummer, and I got this. The job market was really rough, and I ended up getting a job as a runner at this like 24-hour like diner, like glorified diner in Hollywood, and you know, so I started working there, and the entire kitchen staff was like all these Mexicans, you know, all Mexican kitchen staff, and I was the only Mexican runner in the whole thing, you know, and so like it put me in a really kind of strange position, right? Because like I was sort of between the kitchen and the front, you know, and like I could speak Spanish to the kitchen staff, whereas no one else really could. And so, you know, like and like a lot of the front staff was like gay guys, you know, like young, cute gay guys or whatever. Like they had us, like our uniform was like pink and white, you know, like, and so, you know, when I first started working there, I was like, it was a weird situation. I hadn't been working in the restaurant industry for a while, you know, and I definitely have like issues with service, like, you know, having a family having an entire kind of race be defined by labor, you know, which is like, I mean, for me, like, the identity, like the Mexican hood is like very much defined by like our relationship to labor, and in particular our relationship to service, especially in this country. And so working in the service industry was like kind of like, you know, I guess put me at odds with my own kind of like issues, like personal issues or whatever. So anyway, so that so I you know, I got to know some of the guys who were working in the kitchen, and they would always like sort of like tease me. Like at first it started out to be like kind of teasing, like you know, they would call me like, you know, pretty boy, like muñeca, like doll, you know, like, and I would kind of like just sort of like smile and like go on with my thing, you know, and then eventually, you know, they'd like start telling me these like stories like about like the guys that they fucked, and which is like really weird because like these guys were like these big Mexican dudes with like families and like daughters and sons, and like, and they would just like fuck around with guys on the side, you know, and like and in certain ways they were more macho for it, you know, like they that even like that reinstated their like manhood or whatever. So like they felt like it was okay to like sort of tease me in that way, I guess. And then eventually it got like it escalated and escalated to the point where like one guy in particular, always like he had like I don't know what his deal was, but like maybe he actually wanted, I mean, he would ask me for my number, like he like wanted to like have some sort of something, and I was like kind of curious, just like naturally speaking, but like not, I wasn't ever going to do anything about it, you know. But that was really interesting too, because like I got to know him in the process of him like harassing me, you know. Like I got to know like the detail, because for me, like, maybe me asking him questions about his own life was like a way to like dissuade him like talking dirty to me all the time, you know. And like at the time it felt really weird because like sexual harassment is like just kind of like a part of that industry. Like it's just like a given that like as a waitress or like as a waiter you're gonna be sexually harassed, and that like you should use that to your advantage or something. So I was like very conflicted about how to feel in that context. And so anyway, so everything sort of escalated to the point where like like I would have the entire kitchen staff telling me, you know, like that they were gonna like take me out in the back and like gang rape me after work, like all this shit, you know, and like they would all like, you know, it got pretty intense because like I'd have to like it would be me against like you know 8.
Sean Koss, and like my white friends by osmosis, Lance Hicks, we call him Spicoso because he's Hispanic, but he's Lance Hicks, he's from Kansas. Koss is orange. Koss is this Marine, you know, and he's like 140 pounds dripping wet, and he's just skinny. He's a black belt in karate and everything, you know, and he's been around Hispanic people his whole life, and him and my brother were really, really tight. So we obviously invite him over to share our food because culturally we always share your food, you know. When you come into somebody's house, they try to feed you. And so, my grandparents and my cousins, everyone's hanging out, and Sean's there. Oh, you know, he's mucho gusto, you know, it's nice to meet you, very, very nice, you know. And he's getting along good. We're eating burritos and brain cheese, and he's keeping up, you know. He's looking at the tongue of the cow, and he's like, looks good, you know, I'll eat, give me a taco, give me one of those, give me some salsa, you know. And he's getting salsa. Oh, everyone thinks he's, you know, hey, your friend's pretty neat, and he's feeling real accepted, you know. He's like, yeah, you know, I'm not white, you know, I'm Hispanic, I'm Chicano, look, I'm out here, I got cow shit on my shoes, and we just ate, you know what I mean? So he's all excited. Coming around dessert time, and this is something that involves the language, you know, street slang. Panocha is a dessert. It's something that, you know, it's like caramelized maple and you know, like some kind of like flour, like blue corn flour. I forget exactly how they make it, you know, but it's a real traditional food. It's called panocha. And panocha we call each other panocha, you know. It's like, hey, panocha. And that basically means a vagina, a girl's female part. And we're hanging out around the dinner table, you know, and my grandma's, oh, como más, Sean, miro tan flaco, you know, look how skinny you are, eat some more. And he's like, oh, okay. And she said, oh, espérame, are you ready? You can have dessert now, you know. And she's like, oh, you just wait, it's my panocha is so sweet, you're gonna get to taste it. Have you ever had panocha? And Sean is like thinking in his head, he's like, oh my God, Diego and Miguel call each other panocha, or this panoch and panoch, you know. So he's like, oh my God. He thinks that she's talking about a female part, so she's like walking, and he's turning bright red. He's like looking at me, looking at my brother, and my grandma, you know, nice as can be. She's like, oh, mijito, you're gonna love my panocha. You're not gonna be able to get enough. Oh, you're gonna want to come back for my panocha every year, you know. And Koss is thinking he's gonna have to, you know, see my grandma's panocha, and he just erupted. He's like, oh my God, no. He's like looking at my brother, and he's like looking at me. He's like, did your grandma just ask me if I wanted to taste her panocha? And we all, oh, my aunts, you know, 60 years old, my little sister, my mom, everybody, just the whole family erupted in laughter, you know. And that's how Koss ended up meeting my grandma's panocha.
About a year and a half ago, I went to Israel, and I was on Birthright, which is an organized trip that sends anybody who's Jewish to Israel for free, if they'd never been. And we were walking in Jerusalem, and there's a giant very long street of restaurants and stores and shops and candle makers, and our tour guide told us not to go past a certain point on the road or on the street, and she said that it's where all the Muslims are and it's just not respectful to go. And we were pretty close to it, and I walked onto that part of the street, and I was walking for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and a man stopped me, a Muslim man outside his shop, and I didn't realize, but I was wearing my Hamza necklace. And he just looked at me and said, "Thank you," and like nodded his head. And I guess because I'm Jewish, but my father is from Morocco, there's a lot of denying the fact that we come from a Middle Eastern culture, and I look more Moroccan and Middle Eastern than I do traditionally Jewish, so I got to stand on that side of the street because of how I looked, but I didn't belong there.
Anyhow, I wanted to talk about some Indian law issues regarding identity, which kind of I've been interested in because acculturation is something that all people who come to America have to deal with, and it's you know, purported to be the great benefit of America, and I think other people from traditional cultures don't necessarily agree with it. You know, I've heard Indians joke the great melting pot means the scum floats to the top and everyone on the bottom gets burned. This with Indian people, acculturation is really was the next step in the Indian Wars to try to eliminate Indians. After the Indian Wars in the 1800s, the government started a program to acculturate Indians to make them, they believed that the only way Indians could exist is if they became white. One of the most harmful things they did was they enacted this act called the Dawes Act, or the General Allotment Act, where they kind of started cataloging Indian people as part of it. And really the idea was that since Indian lands were held tribally, they would give individual Indians 160 acres on their own, but what happened was that these tribal people were all ripped off of their land and lost in total 90 million acres of tribal land. And then the government started saying, well, maybe Indians aren't competent to sell land, and they put restrictions on it. And then what the government started to do was say, well, if they have white blood, then they're competent to sell land. And so they started again cheating Indian people out of their land based on having any quantum of white blood. And they started rolls. They're called the Dawes rolls, and now they've become census rolls, where Indians are given numbers, and that shows that they are tribal affiliation. They have a tribal affiliation or a blood quantum. It's really really based on blood quantum, how much Indian blood you have. When I was a young attorney, I went to work right out of law school with Legal Aid down in Chinle, Arizona, with DNA's People's Legal Services. And we used to have to fill out these forms, you know, name, address, census numbers. And this one of my first clients came in, and I asked him what his census number was, and he rolled up his sleeve, and he had it tattooed on his arm, his census number. And then, you know, it just became really clear to me what this cataloging of people was really about, and because the only other time I'd ever seen anyone with a number tattooed on their arm was survivors of concentration camps. And so it just became really clear to me that that the whole census and cataloging of Indian people by the government was a way to extinguish Indian people. And it's unfortunate that it's kind of been adopted by some people as the be-all and end-all of who is an Indian, because I think who a person is much more complex than whether a tribe gives them a number.
My day, when we applied to medical school, the powers that be decided that there would be a limit on how many women would be admitted, how many Jews would be admitted, and being Jewish, that made it all the more difficult, because very few Jews were admitted to medical school. That happened to be a field that in those days many Jews wanted to enter, and so I was one of many when I went to medical school. And I was very young, and I thought I'd never stood a chance. I called my dad on the phone, and I said, "Dad, I think I better switch to law." And he said, but he knew I really wanted to be a doctor, and he said, "Try." He says, "What harm can there be? Try." So I worked very, very hard, and won a scholarship, to my surprise, and made it very difficult for the admission folk to reject me. So I was admitted to medical school at the tender age of 18. And I left home for the first time. Well, no, I was in pre-med. I moved into Winnipeg, and where the medical school was located, and attended medical school. It was quite a change for me. I was the youngest student in my class. And at that time, the Second World War had just ended, and all the servicemen returned, and they too applied to medical school. And of course, at that time, and justifiably so, I think they had preferential treatment, and a good portion of the class was filled with veterans who had been in the Army, Air Force, Navy, the Canadian Army, Air Force, and Navy, and they were older, more mature than I was, and they used to tease me incessantly. I was their little mascot.
When we were in Estevan for about 7 years, we decided that we wanted to move away. There were two reasons. One, Zeta wanted to take postgraduate work, and we had 2 children at the time, Martin and Barry, and I felt that there was absolutely no Jewish culture in Estevan, and we wanted them to know who they were, what they were, and it was a good time. At that time when we left, Martin was 5 and Barry was 3. It would have been, it's an easier move. I was pregnant with Joel when we came to the States, and we had a busy 3 years while my husband finished his postgraduate work. He was an exemplary student. He stood. He had high standing in his medical school, and then he had 8 years of general practice and brought that to Minneapolis in his postgraduate years. Yet it was very interesting, at the end of the 3 years, none of the ear, nose, and throat doctors in Minneapolis offered him a job. They all said, "Oh, hi, you're going to make a wonderful doctor in Canada, and Canada's going to be so lucky to have you." And we had every intention of going back to Canada. But then his professor really prevailed on him to stay in Minneapolis, and he took me aside once and he said to me, the professor was very formal, and he called me Mrs. Paisner. He said, "It will be better than your wildest dreams." And his reason that he wanted my husband to stay in Minneapolis was that he knew of his skill and ability, and he wanted to place a man that he had trained at Mount Sinai Hospital. Mount Sinai Hospital at that time had only been open for about 10 years, and he was most anxious to put a person that he trained. At that time they were all men, in the operating room to show what could be done with a microscope. It was a very new technique, and so that is how we stayed in Minneapolis. Minneapolis, certainly at the time we came in 1959, and for many years before then, was known as a hotbed of anti-Semitism. The German Bund was there. The people were not overly receptive, and looking back on it, I think that my husband was never offered a job with another ENT group because he was Jewish. And as I said, they were very happy for him to go back to Canada and ply his trade there and not be competition for them in Minneapolis, because it turned out he was very strong competition with them and for them. And many years later, his group absorbed those medical practices, and they are now all part of the ENT clinic that he started in 1962.
My father is Jewish, and my mother's family is not Jewish. They're from Colorado, and they're cowboys, and they're just completely opposite, and they deny the fact that we are Jewish. So when we would go to my mom's side of the family for the holidays or just to visit, all the meals were pork, and they'd act like they forgot. They'd say like, "Oh my God, well, I have some turkey slices." And that's what we would eat. Every Christmas we got Christmas cards instead of Hanukkah cards. Every Passover we got Easter cards. They didn't attend my brother's bar mitzvah. And a lot of the time they would say grace before they ate and hold hands and do the whole prayer, but we knew that's not what they did. That was probably the first time they'd done that in like 3 years, but because we were there, they wanted to make sure we were doing the exact opposite of the hamotzi.
So Jews and food, we celebrate all our holidays with food. New Year we dip apples in honey for a sweet New Year. For Passover we remember all kinds of different events about the Passover and freedom, matzah, and things like that. So Jews and food are totally connected. In Eastern Europe, at the turn of the last century, they used to accuse Jews of killing Christian children and using their blood for matzah. It's called the blood libel. So Jews have been always connecting themselves to food to carry on the tradition. Lately people have been, it seems popular to call Jews bagel eaters, which is probably offensive, even though we probably do eat a lot of bagels. Although it's offensive, it's probably less offensive than dirty Jew or kike or Christ killers, but still offensive. I remember the first time I heard that, an attorney was talking about a Jewish judge, and he called her a bagel-eating judge. And, that was the first time I heard it. I don't think we're responsible for blueberry bagels or cinnamon raisin bagels. I think those are kind of a corruption of the Christian culture into the bagel-eating Jew culture.
Every culture has their own foods, and with Jews, the foods that they relate to depends upon where they came from. I mean, they did not have their own country ever since the dispersal, ever since the Romans chased them out of Jerusalem, and they dispersed. And if they lived in Greece, their food was Greek. If they lived in Russia, most of the food that they related to were Russian. The Jews that came in to Canada and the United States during 1913, 12, that was the second migration. The first migration in the 1800s when Grandpa Henry came. They went to Winnipeg. He was born in Winnipeg. His family came, and his grandfather came and settled in Winnipeg. So they're old Canadian residents. But their food and the others were all more Russian, and so that food like blintzes, they have the Russian call it peraheh. There are dishes that are peculiar to the Ashkenazi Jew, and those you'll find in any New York deli, and I was raised with those foods. My mother and certainly my wife Sheila, she was raised with those foods, and she learned to cook them. And every festive Jewish occasion there are certain foods that are usually prepared at those times, but they'd be different to the Ashkenazi Jew and the Sephardic Jew. Just as Charles, your mother, at Hanukkah, we make the latkes, potato pancakes, and which is a traditional food at that time. But the Sephardic Jews make those, oh God, I've forgotten the name. Anyway, it's those sweets that your mother makes so beautifully, and I enjoy. And when we spent Hanukkah at your house,
Sufganiyot.
yeah, sufganiyot. Your mother makes sufganiyot, and she made potato latkes too, but she had both of them, and so that the foods depend on where you're from. And the Moroccan Jews, again, Sephardic, they have their food is just like the Arabs, very similar, and they have their special foods and special occasions. But for us, any gathering or get-together of the family, that's an excuse for a feast. and the Jewish women usually made special breads, challah, special desserts, and special meats. They were poor when they were in the old country, so that many of their foods were foods that didn't cost much, like cabbage soup, the borscht. That borscht is a Russian dish, but the Ashkenazi Jews adopted it, and it was cheap and inexpensive and nourishing. And borscht is something I was raised with and I still love. And the chicken, it was hard to get to eat meat, very rare. A chicken was saved for Friday night, and if you could get a chicken to feed your family on a Sabbath, and the Sabbath was very, very important to the Jews at that time. On the Sabbath, the mother becomes the queen, and it's a day of total rest. That has been obliterated in our present civilization, so that there's really no difference. And there is very little difference now. We're just totally assimilated as far as food is concerned. I mean, I love the Mexican food every bit as much as I do the old European dishes.
Food is a big part of our lives. I love it, and I do love cooking and baking. And when I lived in Estevan, I came really as a bride. I was 20 years old. I had never lived away from my parents' home, so I literally moved from my father's home to my husband's home. Had not cooked, but certainly had watched my mother cook all the time. The community that we moved to in Estevan was a very small Jewish community, maybe 35 people in all. But the women there were wonderful cooks and bakers. And that kept part of their culture alive. And so from them and from my own mother and my mother-in-law, I learned how to make many, many things. And I'm really very proud that I've taught my daughters-in-law how to make gefilte fish, how to make knishes. They like the way I cook, and they've learned how to make many of those dishes, and that's perpetuated in the family. And cooking is part of the culture. I've met people from all over the world, from South America. A woman who was an artist came and lived with us for a while. Our son Joel had stayed in South America, and he met her. She came to our house, and she also knew about all the ethnic food that we made. It was part of her culture too. So it's a bond. It's a bond with the Jews around the world, that they all kind of know the same food, and maybe one's mother made it a little bit different and it was a little sweeter, it was a little sour, but in essence it is the same food that came from the ghetto. Now the Sephardic Jews cook altogether different. They're from the southern part, from Spain, and their cooking is more reflective, I think, of the countries in which they lived. They don't know of the Ashkenazi type cooking. So there are two different kinds of cooking, but now they're starting to meld. And so at, is it Purim? No, it's at Hanukkah. We make latkes, but we also make sufganiyat, which is the Sephardic jelly donuts, because it's all made with something that rises with oil. You use oil in potato pancakes, you use oil in the jelly donuts, and of course it was the oil that they used in, to light the candles in the temple. So there is a basic interest from the religion to the cooking to the kitchen to whatever.
My brother Cody, man, there's not much under the sun that we haven't done together, man, you know. The reason we used to get along so good, cause I was the only one crazy as him, you know. Do anything, anybody, whatever, drop a fucking hat, we'd rock and roll. And he decided to move down to Arizona, was gonna go pursue a graphic design career. And he moved down to Arizona blind, going into it, didn't know anybody, had no family, no people, no nothing, so he's going to school. He was there maybe 10 days, 2 weeks at best. And he calls me 5 o'clock in the morning, freaking out. Had just got robbed. And I'm like, fuck, man. I'm like, do you want me to, do you want me to get you a plane ticket? Do you want to come home? Whatever. And you know, we grew up together, and it's always, we all joke around about this racial stuff, nigger spit, kite, you know what I mean? We all just as good friends to dumb all that shit down. But it was the first time I had ever heard Cody use that word nigger. Not like, yo, what's up, my nigga? No, he's like, these fucking niggers broke in my house and fucking robbed me. They broke in my fucking house and robbed me, these fucking niggers. And took me a little bit to get over. I understood his fury and pain and everything, but it was also, took me by surprise, him using those words so emphatically. Must have been maybe, I don't know, maybe 6 months later or something, had another altercation. And of course, again, it's another couple black guys. So I get a phone call, and it's again, these fucking niggers. And I'm having conversations about them, like, dude, like, crooks are crooks, man. Whether they're purple, white, Indian dot or feather, or half-breeds like myself, or whatever the fuck, crooks are crooks, man. Does not, just because you got robbed don't necessarily mean it's some niggers. And he's like, no, fuck that, I know it, it's fucking niggers. And it's the only time I've ever heard him use these words in derogatory terms. But to this day, anything goes wrong, anything weird happens, whatever, he sums it up to those fucking niggers, man. And I've got to the point where I've just had to let all the, let all the bullshit subside and just know that, it's his own ignorance coming from a place of wherever. He's still my brother. I love him. But, yeah, the first and only time I ever heard Cody use like that word in a hateful manner is when a crime was committed against him. Those fucking niggers.
Let's try to break this down, right? Okay, so, there are so many types, right, in the gay, kind of like gay identities based around categories, like the daddy type, or like the twink type, or like all these archetypes, that have to do with like submission or like power. There is such a thing as like a power bottom, which is like this is like a bottom who like takes it really hard and like really well. And, like they're called a power bottom. And then there's like a power top, and I guess that's pretty self-explanatory, right? And so like when a power bottom and a power top meet, that's like a power couple. Like that's amazing sex, I guess. That's like the cream of the crop kind of sex you want to have. But like, within those categories, then there's also like these racial categories, like for example, like Asian twink or like Latino top. Like there's all these expectations that have to do with like how a Latino top should act, right? Which is like, pretty like caliente, like really long lasting, like passionate, intense, like, kind of like masculine sex. But like then there's all these kinds of like different ways, like, right, obviously like configurations, like an Asian twink with like vanilla white top, like, and like vanilla dudes are like these guys who like pretty clean, like condoms, like very like sweet and like old-fashioned sex, like butt sex, I guess. Like it's pretty old-fashioned. It's existed just as long as like regular heterosexual sex, right? And yeah, like the Marquis de Sade said, that butt sex was the best contraceptive, which I always thought was kind of funny. I always like told like my students that when I taught. And what else? Let's see. What other kind of bottoms are there? I don't know. I guess there's obviously like better bottoms than, there's like a white bottom is a huge commodity, like a bubble butt, like a white bubble butt is like a huge, a huge commodity. I mean, men go to the gym to like get that kind of bubble butt to like be able to be a power bottom, and that's just kind of like what you do, And I've always felt like if you're gonna be a top, like you should have a reason to be a top, like you should have a big dick, basically, because like, like I look at these guys who like are trying to be tops with like these tiny dicks. like are you serious? It just makes no sense. So like, so the same way with a bottom, I have no business being a bottom. Like I have a tiny little butt, like if you're gonna be a bottom, you have to like have a nice solid kind of like thing to work with. But like some people, there's always those people who transgress, I guess. Like, want to be something that they, but I guess that can be fun too.
It was funny. I got this musician friend of mine, Gordon DeWitty. He plays the B3 organ. Unbelievable, man. He's by now he's got to be about 55, old school brother, you know, blind black man, unbelievable piano player. And he was in town from Seattle. Calls me up, what's up, soul brother? I'm like, what's up, man? He's like, hey, I got a show for you to come out with me. I'm like, cool, I'll pick you up in a little while. So me and my girlfriend at the time, we pick him up. He takes us to go see Wynton Marsalis. So we see Wynton Marsalis, unbelievable show. Gordon happens to have recorded some albums with Wynton, so Gordon takes us backstage and whatnot, or I walk Gordon's blind ass backstage. And, you know, Wynton's way cool cat, man, you know, gives us autographs, take photos, we do the whole thing, talk about jazz, we talk about music for a while. And we get in our car, we're driving a little Mustang at the time. And so my old lady gets in the back seat and Gordon gets in the front seat. And I'm sober, Gordon's sober, you know, we're cruising. Kimberly's a little tipsy in the back seat, hence which is why I'm driving. And we pull onto my street at the time off of Candelario. So I pull up to the stop sign and I stop, I look both ways, and I start creeping out of the intersection, and I have to slam the brakes because a cop is flying through the intersection with their lights off, no lights at all. So the cop slams his brakes, I slam my brakes, then I go through the stop sign. The cop hits the Whalers and follows us. I'm like, all right. Cop gets out of the car and he's like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing running the stop sign? I'm like, what are you doing driving around the neighborhood with your fucking lights off? You know what he tells me? That's how I catch robbers. That's how you catch robbers? You drive around the streets of Santa Fe with your fucking lights off? You're gonna catch robbers, right? He didn't catch robbers that night, but he caught a couple niggas. That was enough for him. So he comes around the side of my side of the car, and he's right away talking this, give me your license, boy. You know, not like boy, like son, like young man. Give me your license, boy, like go pick my cotton, nigga. That kind of boy. So I give him my license, whatever. Meanwhile, I'm sober, so I'm giving this guy shit. So he's like, I need the registration and insurance and whatnot, and it's in the glove box. My friend Gordon DeWitty is sitting in the passenger seat, and he's a 50-year-old blind black man. He can't find the fucking insurance or registration in the glove box, you know? Come on, man, give me a break. So the cop is vexed, he's pissed at this point. He comes around the other side of the car, and again, spouting out all kinds of racial shit to my boy Gordon DeWitty, you know? And Gordon's this cop's elder for all intents and purposes, you know? So I lean over, I look through, I get the, you know, I'm trying to tell the cop like he has a disability, you know, he can't see, you know, what are you blind? Huh, boy? You blind, boy? Is that what it is? And Gordon looks up, you know, pulls his sunglasses off and his white eyes, and he looks at this cop and he's like, actually, officer, I am blind, and I ain't your fucking boy. And obviously you should have seen this motherfucker's mouth just drop. Boom, wide open. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. And Gordon, fuck that, man. You done used that word boy too many times in this conversation to apologize to me. He's like, not only am I gonna get your badge number and whatnot, so look at this motherfucker's badge number, write this shit down. All right, cool, Gordon, I got you, man, I got you. So Gordon tells this cop, proceeds to tell this cop, he's like, you know what, I recognize you. And the cop is tripping out, you know. Gordon's real, you know, blind, deaf, you know, you lose these senses, you come into, you know, your other senses are heightened and stuff. So Gordon recognizes this guy's voice and whatnot. So Gordon's like, I recognize you. And the cop's like, how the fuck you recognize me? And Gordon's like, you know what? Last weekend, I gave a seminar to you and all of your fucking coworkers about how to treat African Americans in a city like Santa Fe. And I gave in the same presentation, I told you how to treat handicapped people in New Mexico and Santa Fe and places like this. He's like, I just gave you guys this whole fucking rundown. He's like, we even went as far as for your statements and stuff. He had proposed braille statements for the blind and whatnot, which they shot down because, you know, who gives a fuck about a blind nigga who's 50 years old, piano player? Who gives a fuck, right? We give a fuck. So Gordon ends up laying into this cop, man. At this point, I'm outside of the car and I'm living and we're pissed and whatever. This cop was bowing like he was bowing to the king of wherever the fuck, bowing as he walked away from the car back to his trooper. Please, please don't report me. Please don't report me. Why would we report you? Well, I was driving down the street with my lights off. I made some racial comments that were probably out of context. I apologize. You know what I said? Fuck you, cracker, went about my day.